Welcome to the Jobs and Work podcast. If you're like most Americans, you spend a significant amount of your time working. In fact, we spend more time at our jobs than anywhere else. But how often do we really talk about work in America? On this podcast, the Work for Change team will. Work for Change, LLC is a team of social scientists, thought leaders, and digital storytellers who dig into the critical issues affecting American workers and workplaces today. Our podcast is co-hosted by Dr. Kendra Jason and myself, Dr. Kris Maycumber. We'll also bring guests onto the show who reflect the diversity of the American workforce. We are so excited for you to join us as we lead the efforts to humanize the workplace by building dignity and equity into jobs, work, and organizations. Please subscribe to the podcast and share us with your friends and family. You can learn more about Work for Change at workforchangellc.com. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Jobs and Work podcast. This is episode 6, and I'm your co-host, Kris Maycumber.
And I'm Kendra Jason. And today our topic is in the news. We'll be talking about a New York Times article that came out. It's a series called The Primal Scream.
And for those who aren't familiar with the Primal Scream, we're going to play a little sampling of it. And what it is it's a collection of audio where people can call in a hotline, and it is targeted towards working mothers. And that is sort of the framing of our conversation for today is why do working mothers during COVID need a Primal Scream hotline? Why are they specifically being targeted? What are some implications of that? And what are some things we can do as a society and as workplaces to sort of better meet the needs of working families in general? So we're going to play a little sampling of the Primal Scream audio so you can hear people screaming.
Welcome to the New York Times Primal Scream line, where the floor is yours to yell, laugh, cry, or vent for a solid minute.
I just wanted to say,
I'm so sick of my goddamn kids.
this pandemic has made me realize that maybe I'm not cut out to be a mother.
I am doing my 6th load of laundry today.
Oh, God, every day I think I can't do this again. But then I do. I get it. I get up and I do it because that's just what parents do, right?
Okay. So that is some of the primal screaming that we heard from people. And as you heard in there, there's a lot of emotion. I heard pain. People are struggling. There's stress. There's certainly been mental health consequences of the major changes in disruption to people's lives. So we know that the impacts of COVID are far-reaching and have impacted families economically, socially, educationally, professionally. And what we're going to be focusing on today is how working mothers have been impacted and the extra burdens that they have encountered. So we know that women have taken more of a economic hit from COVID, particularly women of color in terms of their participation in the workforce, losing jobs, right? Getting let go from jobs, but also having to leave jobs to take care of children. So we're really going to be talking about the intersection between work and family. And although women today comprise approximately half of the paid workforce, they are still expected to take on the burden of the unpaid labor inside of the home, which is what sociologists often call the second shift. So they work outside of the home for paid labor to contribute to the overall family income. And then they also do a lot of the unpaid labor inside of the home. On average, in a heterosexual couple, women do twice the amount of child care work and family care work in domestic unpaid labor. We are seeing more than at any point in our history, men are doing more hours per week devoted to that work, but we still have a large disparity. So that existed before COVID. We already had that unequal division of labor inside of the home for working families before COVID. So what happened is COVID hit, not only was work impacted, and family care, but schools were closed. So then we had this like third variable that got thrown into the mix. And because of the other things that I just mentioned about women's expectations to be primary caretakers of children and to take the lead on the children's education, whether they were opting out of the workforce to take care of children, which really isn't an option, but a necessity to take care of children, or they lost their jobs due to COVID. What we're seeing is that women really absorbed a lot of what was going on inside of families during COVID. And we see that reflected in those primal screams. So that's what we're going to be digging into today. Kendra, what are your thoughts as a scholar of work, as somebody who sees this through a work lens, about the primal scream? Like, how do work scholars think about this? How are they talking about it? What are some questions you have?
Yeah, thanks for that great introduction, Kris. You know, it speaks to a lot of things. I mean, one thing, and it's a common theme in this podcast, it's a common theme in conversation, is that COVID-19 really just illuminated the disparities that were already happening in our society, right? And so what's really interesting about this, this conversation about women, and it's so much conversation about women and COVID and the workforce and how they're being pushed out of the workforce and how they're having this extra burden of care. And I think that some people, not work scholars, I'm just saying it in general, society and conversation, you know, one of the responses is, well, that's what women do. Like, women take care of the family, women educate the kids, women, that's quote unquote women's work. And so one thing as scholars of, people who've studied work, we really want to push back on these boxed in and rigid definitions and expectations of what women and men should be doing, right? Because there is no such thing in reality as women's work. It's just work. Women do not own this work. This is not their domain by nature. They are responsibilities that have been given to them based on societal expectations that this is what women should be doing. But the thing is, and the truth is that men can equally do this work just as well, right? And so it doesn't mean that women should be solely responsible for the domestic labor, which is childcare, medicine, cleaning, elder care, all of those things, and men should just be providers, right? That is a really antiquated way to think about how our homes operate. And you're right. There have been studies that have been done that show that men, especially domestic partners, are doing more hours of work. But what's missing from that conversation, at least in everyday conversation, is that women are still doing more work. So even as men are increasing their participation in the home, it's not decreasing the amount of labor and hours that women are putting in the home. So yes, kudos to men for doing more than their fathers and their grandfathers did in this realm of domestication. But it is not alleviating the amount of labor and burden and stress that typically, like you said, in a normative household, heteronormative household, like a regular household, that you have women doing less work. And so that's a part of the conversation as well. We really need to get rid of these ideas and expectations that women should be doing this work and they're better at this work. And therefore, the reason why this is so important is because there is this expectation that women should be doing this work. Now that women are experiencing these heavy burdens, these psychological burdens, this burnout from all of these conditions that COVID has presented for especially working mothers, there's not a call for help, for alleviation, because it's what's expected. Leave dad alone. He has to work. Give him the office. while mom, tries to work and or, take care of the kids while they're in remote learning or whatever the case may be.
Right. And I think what's interesting, that something that we talked about yesterday as well, is how because of this sort of broad sweeping expectation that women are just going to absorb this work, it's sort of built into assumptions about family life and assumptions about what couples will be like and who's going to do what. It's almost like unspoken, and I always tell young people, if gender equity is important to you, if you want to have a fair division of labor, you got to talk about that. It's not just going to happen because we're all on autopilot. Like the expected family members, extended family will expect you to do certain things, and it's sort of built into family life. So you've really got to be intentional about doing things differently, doing family differently, and doing relationship division of labor differently. But I think what it points to is because we have this like broad sweeping expectation that we don't think about, well, how do we organize family life? How do we organize work in ways that prevents this? But we're just putting these supports in. Okay, so there's a scream line. We actually have a hotline so women can viscerally scream into a phone line about their frustrations, like a release valve, right? So it's like this sort of being able to let out some of that steam, which doesn't change anything. Like maybe it feels cathartic and helpful in that moment for those people, but it isn't doing anything to change the conditions under which women feel like they have to scream. And it reminds me a lot of like the way that we as a culture, we tend to come up with individual solutions to really these broader structural problems. And it makes me think about a lot of my work is focused on violence and victimization and violence prevention. And we tend to think about solving the problem of violence in very individual ways. Like with sexual violence, we say, oh, well, women should carry a rape whistle or pepper spray. Well, that doesn't prevent violence from happening. That's an individual way to just burden people, potential survivors of violence, to prevent their own victimization. It's not changing the conditions under which violence takes place. So I feel like this is sort of a similar kind of, fixture. Like, let's put something in to relieve the pressure and strain of this, but it doesn't do anything to prevent it from happening.
Yeah, and what I also wanted to mention, as you're talking about like what's normative and what's expected, is that it's not always in the case that you have these really traditional roles, and that women are all alone and mothers are all alone. I don't want to give that as a generic, if you will, experience, because there are plenty of women, mothers, and families who are supporting each other in the best way possible, right? But the thing is that COVID is difficult. COVID has been difficult, and like a omnipresent, oppression around all families. I mean, everyone has been affected by the effects of COVID-19, typically in some type of negative way. And so, I think about my own experience last summer, after we had you had the emergency switch to online learning, and, my job went online as well. And my husband's job went online, and everybody was at home, and it was shelter in place, and there was a lot of panic and a lot of uncertainty. And, and my family, I'm in a really privileged position. My daughter and my husband, they were very supportive. What do you need? What space do you need? Like, they tried not to, they try to support it and carry their weight. But being the mother of the household, right? A lot of times we as women and we as mothers, we carry these, these roles and these responsibilities. And often when there is help offered, because we also have been socialized that this is our burden alone, we don't take the help, or we don't think outside the box or look outside for help and assistance. And so, there is a wide range of experiences in American households. And so, we don't want to paint the picture necessarily that mothers are all out there by themselves and they don't have any support by their domestic partners or family members and things like that. But because of the way our society is organized, as Kris says, women's burden under COVID-19 is very heavy, to the point that these hotlines have been introduced into society. One other really quick, interesting tidbit is that some of these, there are multiple hotlines. Some of these hotlines have been introduced by teachers. Mm-hmm. And teachers were inspired to start their own community of Primal Screams because of the challenges that they were having with their online teaching experience as well. And most teachers, especially K-12, are women, are mothers, and are dealing with these same things in their own personal lives as they are professionals trying to educate our children as well. And so it's broad and it's diverse, but in the end, we need to better support families. And the way that we can support families in this situation, or one great avenue to support families, is to support working mothers. And how do we get employers to do that? How do we get society to think about mothers in these really interesting and long-term ways?
Right. And I think what that requires is a shift to recognizing that our workers are more than just workers. They are members of communities and they are members of families. We talked a few weeks back, about the ideal worker norm, how that sort of ideology of the ideal worker was, predicated on the male worker who didn't have any, family responsibilities pulling him, that he was able to devote all of his time and attention to work. Well, women are now, comprising a lot of the workforce. So we need to redefine what an ideal worker is. It's somebody who has healthcare needs. It's somebody who has children, who has aging parents, who has, so all of those, really just humanizing the workplace, which is what Work for Change does really well, right? And one more note I just wanted to make before we wrap up for today is, you mentioned supports and what a dramatic difference that makes for people, right? Because I know in our culture, the living intergenerationally, like living with family members, is not something that is considered normalized, as it is in many other cultures where families live together. The grandparents help take care of the grandchildren, the adult children are taking care of their aging parents, and that is how people do family in many cultures. Here, it's sort of like a running joke of like the person in their 30s who lives with their parent, and it's like that is not the case any longer, right? If we were to center families, we would see that actually makes sense from a family-centered model, rather than this sort of like individualistic cultural ethos where everyone's going to take care of themselves. And what I know is doing family life without having extended family or your family around is much harder to do, right, than it is when you have those supports in place. So for families who maybe have the grandparents or siblings, and they're all kind of in it together, that does kind of distribute the burden around when you can share childcare. But for families who don't, it can feel very isolating to just be doing that work alone. And certainly when you're trying to balance that and a career, that's why we have a Scream line. But I think, what we'll be doing in conversations henceforth, on this podcast is always asking, what can we do as employers? What can we do as workplaces to better meet the needs of our families?
So I want to just, wrap up by giving some quick little tips to employers on how you can think about this and how you can approach this. Number one is throw away your assumptions of what a traditional family, like Kris says, doing family is. Throw out the notion that it's just a husband and a wife. Families make up all type of dynamics. You have same-sex couples. You have multi-generational households. You have child-free and childless women, and you have domestic partners. And so even though, again, we are centering this conversation on working mothers because that's typically and generally where this burden has been exacerbated, these experiences in family are very diverse. So, when you think about these policies, broaden your understanding and arrangement of what you think of a family is. Another thing to do is, in your policies, number one, don't think about these solutions as short term. Don't think about them as Band-Aids. I know we feel like we have to work quick, but COVID-19 has been around for over a year now. And so people are really expecting some long-term solutions, not just Band-Aids over how we're responding to this. So one thing to do is and the New York Times actually has a series. They have some suggestions that you can look up under this series, Primal Scream. But I think one really important thing to do is offer part-time work to full-time employees and don't cut their pay for the time that is being adjusted. So pay them by the hour or however they're being paid, but don't try not to make it a huge financial loss as you offer flexible work arrangements. The other thing that you can do or consider doing is paying for childcare, helping with childcare arrangements. If you can't do that and your workers need to take leave, then try to figure out a way to offer paid leave. There's a lot of suggestions out there about offering unpaid leave for time that people have to take off. But again, doing unpaid leave exacerbates the financial burden, which exacerbates other issues. And so if you can figure out a way to offer paid time off as a part of the solution instead of unpaid time with your flexible work arrangements, these are just some quick little tips to help bridge that gap and offer more long-term solutions versus short-term solutions. And so I wanted to offer those things there. Like I said, the New York Times article on Primal Screams is released early February. They have a few good articles that you can look up if you want to look up some more solutions, or you can contact Kris and I. We run a business called Work for Change. You can find us at work4changellc.com. And what we do, we're consultants and we offer guidance, suggestions, policy and practice changes so that you can better meet the needs of your workers so that you can have a more equitable, dignified, and humane work experience for all workers. And so that improves employer retention and loyalty and productivity and just a well-rounded work experience. And so you found us on YouTube. We have other social media realms that you can keep up with our news. We're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter. And of course, again, you found us here on YouTube. So please like and subscribe and share so that we can work to make the world of work better.